Are you struggling with roadblocks as a woman in the challenging and constantly changing world of corporate America? If you feel stuck in your career, you may be holding yourself back and may not even realize it. Prepare to be enlightened by the meaningful discussions here at the No Woman Left Behind podcast. Each week, gather the insight you need to break down those walls of limiting beliefs. Unleash your full potential and unlock the leader within. Listen to raw conversations with corporate women as they share inspiring stories with the purpose of obtaining their dream career and living a truly fulfilling life. Here's your host, Rosie Zilinskas.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about all things clutter. We're going to define what clutter is. We're going to talk about the cost of the clutter in your physical space, but also what does clutter do to your mental space? We're going to touch base on spiritual clutter and health clutter as well. And in order to do that, we have Julie Coraccio. Julie Coraccio is an award-winning professional life and end-of-life organizer, certified life coach, and professional declutterer. She's passionate about supporting people in clearing clutter in all areas of their lives, getting organized, and becoming more mindful and aware. She is the host of the popular podcast Clear Your Clutter Inside and Out, and is the author of 15 books. So stay tuned for this decluttering conversation with Julie. Hey everyone, before we go into today's episode, I wanted to remind you that there is a free quiz that you can take on the nowomanleftbehind.com website. If you log on to the homepage and you scroll down just slightly, you're going to see a section that says, let's find out where you are in your career. If you click on the radio button that's called Take the Quiz, there will be a pop-up that comes up and it says, what's the key blocker in your career path? There are 3 key blockers that you may be operating under and you may not even know it. So if you click on just take the quiz, it's going to be about 10 questions. It really shouldn't take you more than 3 minutes. And then you're going to be able to get some additional resources just by taking the quiz. So remember, go to nowomanleftbehind.com to take the free quiz. Julie, thank you so much for being here today. Julie, I wanted to ask you the very basic question. What is the definition of clutter? I know we're going to talk about different types of clutter, but what is your definition of clutter?
Well, first, thanks for having me on, Rosie. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for having a podcast that's supporting women. My definition of clutter is a little bit different than most people. My definition is this: clutter is anything that prevents you from creating the life you choose, deserve, and desire. I'm very purposeful with those words, but my hope with that is I want people to see the bigger picture. So a messy desk is more than a messy desk. It's a roadblock to a promotion, for example.
Oh, I love that you just said that, because as you well know, and thank you for the shout out there to the podcast, but this podcast is geared towards women in the corporate world that are trying to advance in their careers, and they're finding that they're either sabotaging themselves in ways that they don't know, or maybe they have roadblocks. And I love that you started there, because in this day and age, we have so much information. Actually, I heard someone recently say the term infobesity. I was like, oh my gosh, that is a great term, because obviously we're just so overwhelmed. And I personally know that when my desk is not cleared up, I always feel like I have this weight, and it's just so relatable to me. So tell me a little bit more about how you have come to that determination.
Well, statistics back me up, just on if we use the messy desk example. So your colleagues are less likely to trust you. They're afraid. I can tell you from my own personal experience, I used to do development, was a grant writer, and I'd say, hey, I need this financial piece. And she's like, oh, I have it right here. And I said, I'll see you in an hour when you find it, right? But if you're on a deadline and your colleagues are trusting you less, and so it's just about seeing the bigger picture. And why I did that through work. And as I worked with people and seeing like they would just get this little narrow definition of clutter. For example, the inner affects the outer. And so as you clear your desk, you clear that physical clutter, you're releasing mental clutter, right? That's going to help reduce your stress, your anxiety, and your worry. And it's all related. And so seeing again how holistically, when you clear clutter, it can change your life.
Wow, that is so impactful and so powerful, because knowing that when you clear your physical space around you, it kind of clears. And I feel it. Like when I clear my desk and like clean my office and stuff, I feel better, I feel freer, I feel lighter. So I can totally relate to that. Now, one of the things that I know you and I touched base on when we last spoke is that clutter, and it depends on the type of clutter that you're talking about, has that overwhelm and anxiety feeling. So how would you describe those feelings coming about due to the clutter that you have around yourself?
I think it's like clutter can cause depression, depression can cause clutter. I think you can get caught in that cycle. You're overwhelmed with clutter, so you create more clutter in an attempt to reduce the overwhelm. So I think that some people are definitely going to get caught in that cycle. And where a lot of people get tripped up is if you were to walk in your office or your home, because remember, your home life is affecting your professional life and vice versa. And it's really important. If you can't find your keys to get to work in the morning, you're probably losing something at work. So I want people to be aware of that. And so I think it's important to understand that and that it's affecting everything.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what are some of the things that you maybe recommend to people? And we'll start with like the physical clutter. What are some of your pointers that you give to people, instead of just like throw it all out, throwing out like the baby with the bathwater type thing? What are a few tips that you can recommend to people to start decluttering that physical space?
Well, the first thing is pick one place to start. We just talked a moment ago about being overwhelmed. And a lot of times that happens because, oh my gosh, I've got to declutter my house, or I walk in my office and I have this huge office and I'm overwhelmed. So just simply pick one area to start. Now, some people say to me, oh, Julie, I don't know where to start. So here are some questions that you can ask. Do you have a deadline that needs to be met? You're having new shelves installed in your office. Well, there's a good chance that you want to start there. If you're not paying your mortgage on time, wherever that area is that you do your bills, you're going to want to clean that up. Or if something you're just like, you know what, every time I walk into my bedroom, I can't relax, it adds stress to me, then that's where you're going to want to start. So those are a couple things. And remember, 10 minutes a day equals over 60 hours in a year. You can accomplish a lot in 60 hours. And so I don't abide by I don't have time. And the other thing, because I hear that a lot, and that's not true. And then my first immediate response is, how much time are you spending on social media? Because people tell me they don't have any time in the world, yet are spending hours on social media. So divert some of that time to decluttering and organizing.
Or Netflix, right? Or any kind of.
Yes, exactly. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
For sure. And so I will have to admit, my husband's better about, keeping up with like the clutter day to day. Sometimes I have an ottoman next to my bed, and sometimes like 2 or 3 days go by, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't function if there's like too much stuff around me. So I try to clear it off every like 2 or 3 days. Like, he does it every single day, and I'm like, man, I wish I had that discipline. But to your point, it only takes like a minute or two. And actually, a few days ago, I was looking for some medication, like some migraine medication, and I opened up my personal, because he has his cabinet with his all medications and supplements and stuff, and I did mine, and I hadn't cleaned out my medicine cabinet for a very long time, so I pulled everything out. Good. And I put all of the medications in a plastic bag because I'm going to go dispose of them at the pharmacy and whatever. But I felt so much better. And it took maybe like an hour because it was a lot of stuff. And I'm trying to figure out, do I need this? Do I need that? And once it was done, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I can find stuff. So what are some things that you think women in the corporate world can relate to the decluttering, whether it's, mental clutter, because sometimes we also do have mental clutter. So let's talk about the mental clutter when it comes to career development.
Sure. A lot of worry and anxiety. How am I being perceived? Will I get that promotion? I think that and I think depending on the industry, it can be a lot more intense. My husband's in network engineer. I don't understand that at all, but there are very few women in his field. And so, because I'm the one who tell me these stories, I'm like, well, here's the woman's perspective, right? And so I think mental clutter or always worrying and never shutting off your mind, as small business owners, we can get, there's always something for us to do. And that translates to the corporate world as well. So I think those are a couple examples of mental clutter. And so one of the things that I always suggest to people is become present, right? The present moment is your point of power to change. If you said something in a meeting, you can't take that back. If you're worried about your numbers in the future, the future's written in pencil. So how can you become present so that you don't worry? Because when you take action and look at it, then that tends to lessen that. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. And I find that too, if I'm procrastinating on whatever, and then once I'm like, oh, I don't want to do whatever, and then I finally get it done, I'm like, oh my gosh, if I had just done that earlier, I would have saved myself all of that anxiety and mental, like, oh gosh, this is like hanging over my head. And so, yes, that is definitely very relatable. Now, I'm so glad that you actually give your husband the woman's perspective, because if it's a situation where there's a lot of men and not as many women, we need those advocates, So I'm glad that you're, kind of giving him the woman's perspective. Now, we also could have clutter in our relationships, right? And that could be work relationships, or that could be personal relationships. So how does that clutter show up in those work relationships first?
Absolutely. So with work, maybe it's true, maybe we're being gaslit. Or as women, especially if you're with aggressive men, I'm probably going to try to push past your boundaries, right? Or talk over you, or our favorite term, mansplaining, right? And so there are different things like that are going on, and being aware of that. And one of the things that I've learned to do is I match the energy. Earlier I was excited you talked about how your space feels better, right? Because everything's energy. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. And so one of the things I've learned to do is I match the energy. So I had someone scream at me the other day. So I don't like to scream, but I got loud, right? And a lot of times we don't do that, and that stopped them in their track. If you physically move towards me, then I'm going to do something like that. So I think it's very important, and you can do it in a professional, good way, but that's also about setting boundaries. And it's just been my experience with women in the corporate world that or a lot of people especially men, going to try to roll right, and women can do it too. I don't want to sound, like I'm siding with women only, but I think that that's important to have those boundaries and say, okay, this is how the relationship's going to be, and this is what's acceptable and what isn't acceptable. Because I think, remember, people sense things. We're talking about energy, and if you push your boundary a little bit, and then it keeps, and then eventually you might wake up one day and be like, wow, I've totally taken on this other person's job because I couldn't say no, and they just kept pushing me past what I was comfortable with.
I think that's a perfect point that you just made, because a lot of times women don't have the comfort to say no. And as a matter of fact, I just did a short TikTok on the fact that I've noticed that women are constantly apologizing at work.
Yes.
Say, I'm sorry, can I ask you a question? And my question was like, why are you apologizing for asking a question? Just ask the question. So if you catch yourself apologizing all the time, try to halt that, because that's also mental clutter. And I think it's mental clutter in the fact that it shows maybe that you don't have enough confidence that you can just ask the question without apologizing. And I also know that when women are trying to say no to whatever, whether it's an appointment or an assignment, they always have to list out all the reasons. And men don't do that. Men just, no, sorry, can't do it. Or no, sorry, I can't make the meeting, for example. And they don't feel like they need to explain themselves. And so why do you think women feel the need to explain ourselves to, for those reasons that I described?
I feel we are either coming from love or we're coming from fear. To me, that's really what it boils down to. But for me, fear includes feeling not good enough, feeling not worthy, and not feeling loved. And that's with all relationships. And so if I feel good enough, then I don't have to explain, right? And I also think there is societal conditioning going on with that as well, right? It's not just about that, but like, oh, I can't take up space. Like, I want women to think about their physicality. Do you find yourself kind of scrunching your shoulders and moving back, or are you open, right? Or trying to make yourself small? Look at that, because that's one of those things you are probably not conscious of, probably not aware of, and are doing it, right? Because we're taught to play small. I mean, what women do to other women sometimes amazes me that, oh, well, I didn't have anyone help me. I'm not going to give someone else a hand up. And I wish that we could completely switch that mentality and support one another. But think about your physicality and how you are with that.
I like that. I heard in a motivational speaker years ago, women that don't help other women should go to hell. I was like,
Yeah.
wow. Now, I want to go back to something that you said earlier, and I want to explain the term. You said sometimes men can gaslight, or people, people in general can gaslight other people. So, but I think men are notorious for gaslighting women. So, can you explain that term, please?
Sure. Well, some examples would be, this is happening to me right now. It was kind of rules for me, but not for thee. And so they'll make you think you're crazy. Oh, they didn't say that, even though you've got a recording of the meeting. Oh, you're too sensitive. And I bet women hear, oh, you're emotional, you're over emotional. We get that a lot, especially in the corporate world. And so it's kind of like making you think, did I remember incorrectly? Or maybe I was second guessing yourself, when it's not. They're just trying to manipulate you and have you do what they want. Is that a good enough explanation?
That is a good enough explanation. And the question that comes to my mind is, are these people that are the gaslighters, I wonder if they're aware that they're doing it, or do they just have a narcissistic personality? That's always the question that I wonder, because how is it that you're trying to turn the situation around on me and make me responsible for your actions?
I think that's a great question. I think it's a combination of both. So I recently moved back to my hometown. I've been thinking about this a lot, because I'm like, is this a generational thing, or is it everyone in my hometown? And so I have this new next door neighbor that moved in. He was actually the one that screamed at me, and I screamed. I said, I'm not going to allow you to talk to me this way. And I hung up the phone. But this is someone who's in his 70s, and people will say things behind him about his back, but will never confront him. And I was like, you can't treat me that way. And I think that was shocking. But if you've done something for 50 or 60 years and no one ever calls you out on it, and I also think with older people, you didn't have Oprah, you kind of get set in your ways, you learn to behave. And if people don't stop it and say, hey, then you might not be aware of it. And then I think other people are absolutely aware it's a narcissist thing going on, and that's just how they operate. But so many times we'll just complain behind the back. We won't confront and do anything about it. So this bad behavior continues.
Okay, I think that's a great point. And I think that applies to a work relationship. I had a client say once that she was having a very tough time with the manager. And once she actually expressed to the manager how she was being made feel when he addressed her, he was like, oh, I'm so sorry, because I didn't realize that I was doing that. And so a lot of times it's up to us to, very politely bring up the situation or the conversation. And that's one of the other things I think that clutter does, is when you have a push-pull relationship and you are afraid to have that difficult conversation, that also shows up as clutter in your head, because it's weighing on your mind. And once you have the conversation, it might not be as bad, but to your point, you feel that fear to have that slight confrontation and say, listen, you can't treat me that way. I feel that you're disrespecting me when you do X, Y, or Z. But the bottom line is that we have to drum the courage to have those conversations to clear that clutter, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think we also have this misconception that setting a boundary needs to be harsh, right? And that needs to be negative, and I need to come out like that. Not all. You know what, Rosie, I feel really disrespected. You said this to me and I feel this. Please don't do it again. Right? I wasn't screaming, I wasn't in your face, but I clearly stated, okay, this is what happened and this is how I feel. It doesn't have to be this big production. And I know, and it's, for me, it was, I've had, used to be a doormat, and the first time you set that boundary, it's going to be super hard. But you know what? The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
Yes, I totally agree with that. So I am remarried. We actually just had our 7th anniversary. And when I got married, to my husband, my kids were 17 and 15 at the time. And, things blending a family is not easy.
Hmm.
And so one day, I mean, things were just havoc. So I went into each of my kids' rooms and I was like, listen, this and this and this. And then I went to my husband and I said, listen, this and this and this. And it wasn't like anything, terrible. It was just like,
Hmm.
we need to do whatever we were dealing with at the time. And then it was just like a weight off my mind. They knew kind of where I was coming from and it actually improved things. So to your point, it doesn't always have to be this like big, massive fight or anything like
Yes.
it could just be a simple conversation of, hey, this is how I feel. And I think one of the things that, especially with young people today,
Hmm.
communication, it's like, oh my gosh, how do I do that? Because they do everything through text. And
Right.
it's so important for us to have that vulnerability of, listen, I just need to have a conversation with you, and then you can move on your merry way from there. Now, I do know that there's a couple of other different types of clutter. So we have spiritual clutter and we
Hmm.
also have health clutter. So can you tell me a little bit about each of those?
Sure. So spiritual clutter, and again, this is my definition, and someone might put it somewhere else, but not being able to forgive. I mean, talk about taking up space in your mental, in your mind. It's not being able to forgive, not having gratitude, not following your passion. If being in the corporate life isn't what you want, then kick it to the curb and become an artist, right? It's really about being in touch with your soul. Those are a couple examples. For health clutter, it's not eating well, it's not exercising, it's not taking care of yourself. I'm a huge believer in having a mindfulness practice that can be mowing the lawn for you. For my friend, it's listening to classical music, right? But then again, it's related. If you have physical clutter, you might have mouse droppings, right? They're all the same. That's going to affect the air that you breathe. And so I really want to hit home with people that how everything affects it all. And it's all clutter's holistic.
I actually have to admit that I'm very surprised that you didn't mention the word God or religion in the spiritual clutter, which is nice. I mean, you can obviously, do whatever, but the spiritual clutter, not having gratitude is huge. Not being able to forgive is tremendous because I always say forgiveness is for you, not
Yes.
necessarily for the other person, because when you don't forgive and you're angry and you're, mad and whatever, that's not good for your health. That's not good for your body, for your mind, for your soul. So when you forgive somebody, in my opinion, it's freeing yourself from all of that
Hmm.
mental, spiritual clutter, and you're able to release it and let it go and then move on to bigger and better things. But in the movies, you always see these, people that are angry and whatever.
Yeah.
It's like if you just forgave all that, you would have had a completely different life. And then with the health clutter too, it's you shouldn't be eating that, but you're eating it anyway, and you're just like, oh, who cares? So let's talk a little bit about the health clutter because I think that's something that everybody can relate to. What are some things that you generally start with when you have somebody that's dealing with health clutter?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's a statistic that 80% of our why we're in the hospital is stress related, right? So many diseases are happening because we're stressed out. So I look at everything. How often are you sitting in your desk? Are you sitting 8 hours a day, not moving? What's your indoor pollution like? What kind of cleaners are you using? I mean, they talk about the toxins and everyday household items. I use green cleaners. That's one thing I've been doing for years. And then, like, what are you eating? What are your health habits? And, meditation to me is part of the health thing. Like, what are you doing to calm your mind? Because it all starts in our mental state. Like, oh my gosh, I'm stressed out. Well, the body's not stressed out. It's stressed out because your mind says I'm stressed out and I'm upset about that. So it's really looking at different. Do you go to the dentist twice a year? Do you have your eye appointment if you need new glasses, right? It's really looking at all of those elements and the overall picture of health.
That's great. Now, as far as your story, I want to make sure that we talk about your story. How did you get to where you are today? How did you become a declutterer, a professional declutterer? And I know you have a lot of books that you've written and you're award winning. So tell me a little bit about how you got to where you are today and be an expert declutterer?
Well, it started, my friends were like, you're uptight, help me get organized, right? And so before I even had the business, I was doing organizing my friends when I lived in Los Angeles. And then I moved to Raleigh and I had a job where I was director of development. And literally the day I started, I'm like, oh, this place is crazy. And the person that they had temping was like, this place is nuts. And sure enough, so I was like, okay, I've just moved to Raleigh. I don't know anyone. I'm in this job. So I'm going to create a business. So what can I do? So I was at that other job 13 months. So I spent the entire time creating a business. And so, but then I had this aha moment. My business at the beginning was called Healing Through Organization. I never recommend changing your name. It's a real pain in the,
Yeah.
but I had this aha moment. I was working with a client and she said, can we just talk before we do anything? And so I usually work in 4-hour blocks. So we spent 3 hours talking, but boy, in that last hour, did we blam through stuff and we were able to declutter like it was nobody's business. So that was an aha moment. It's more about the clutter, right? And then meantime, I'm doing this, had a show called Reawaken Your Brilliance, which I ended up taking as my business name. And I'd interview all these body, mind, spirit experts. And they'd use me as a guinea pig, or they'd say, read my book, or we're going to do these exercises. So it was really about clearing a lot of spiritual clutter for me and more. And so then I was like, oh, you know what? We can organize anything, but it's more, let's focus on the decluttering. And then taking that holistic view and seeing as people would face perhaps a stressful event, how they were able to release clutter afterwards. And so that's kind of how it started for me.
Wow, that's awesome. And I think it's one of those situations where you took your core genius, which is you like to organize things, and you turned it into, Reawaken Your Brilliance. How did you come up with that name though? Because I love that name.
The truth was, so I was starting this internet TV show. Like I went to the producer's house and he's like, come on, let's get started. I'm like, I don't have a name. And Thrive kept coming up. And then I'd Google and I'm like, oh my gosh, a bazillion things are named Thrive. So I sat down to meditate. This is one of the reasons why I'm a huge believer of this. And literally, it's like Reawaken Your Brilliance just popped into my head. When we have those quiet moments, it sometimes can be in the bathtub or the shower or meditating, then that opens it up to us to receive messages from whatever your viewpoint is from that intuitive space.
Right. And meditation is, I think it's more and more coming to light that it's so important. We actually just did a whole course at work where people are, actually, I think it's not Stanford University. What university? I can't remember the university that does it, but there's a woman that has this course on just being able to talk about all the different things that could help people. And it's a free course. Oh, it's actually Yale, I think. And she's actually doing a ton of good just by letting people know. And she kind of walks through the whole process of just becoming holistic and aware, and it's free. And, so it's actually wonderful. But she talks about meditation, how important it is. And I think people think that you have to sit there for an hour and not think about anything.
Exactly.
Meditation is just sitting quietly for 5 minutes or even for 1 minute to start. And then, it's like anything. You have to practice and then you have to get good at it. I can sit for like 10 minutes comfortably and just kind of, not necessarily clear my mind, but try to focus. And if a thought comes in and out, I'm like, don't think about that, keep trying to breathe, whatever. So what kind of meditation do you practice?
Something called transcendental meditation.
Oh,
TM
wow,
for short.
You're really way up there.
I don't know if I'd call it way up there, but yeah, I did that when I was a nanny and did the whole thing. And I have had times where I've meditated for over an hour and it's felt like a minute has passed. I mean, when you have those moments, you're like, okay, that's why I want to keep doing that. But I just want to say, like I mentioned earlier, like mowing the grass is really meditative for me. My friend listens to classical music. So don't think, like you said, you have to sit down and do something specific. If that allows your mind to be open and release, then have at it.
Yeah. Another thing that I do is I take a walk and I don't listen to a podcast or whatever. I just, what am I thinking? I look around, I observe and just kind of try to be present in the moment. So that's huge. Well, Julie, this has been such a great conversation. So I was wondering if maybe you could provide us with 2 actionable tips that a woman in the corporate world can do that will help her either think about her career or advance in her career or something to that effect.
Well, the 2 things I'm gonna suggest, and I'm a fan of writing things down, whether I'm old school, I've got a written plan, or I haven't moved tech completely. So, but I want people to, one, write down the real impact of clutter on your life. Because I mentioned it earlier, like the cluttered desk as being a roadblock to a promotion. And so I want people to make that connection. So what is clutter costing you? I mean, the older I get, you can't put a price tag on peace of mind, right? It's worth everything. But is it costing you time? Is it costing you an argument in your relationship? And so really understanding and writing down what's the impact, what will I gain, and what is it costing me? So then when you're like, oh man, Julie, I don't want to clean out my closet or clean off my desk, then you have that little piece of paper to look for. And the other thing that I'm going to suggest is that you dig deeper behind the why. Sometimes we don't have to know, but it's like, why do I have these relationships? Because remember, everything's energy. So if you have a relationship where you're being gaslit, I want you to look back on your life and see, has that happened before? Because until we learn that lesson, until we clear that clutter, it's going to keep coming around for us to complete it and move forward. So get to the why behind your clutter. Why do I think I act this way? Why do I do this? Or why am I not afraid to let go this dusty box that's been boxed up for 20 years, even though both my parents have passed? What's the why behind that? So those are the 2 things that I'd suggest for people to start decluttering their life.
Sounds good. I think the why is so powerful because when you start trying to understand why you do something or why you're afraid to speak up in your relationship, whether it's with your manager or your partner or whatever, then you're right. You're going to keep doing, what do they say? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And I think that's a good way to put it, because once you understand what it is that you're doing, and a lot of times, I think more often than not, it always does go back to something that happened in your childhood, right?
Yeah, the majority that I've found, that's been my experience for sure.
Yeah. Actually, one more thing before I let you go. Is there maybe a story that you can tell us about a client that you were able to help declutter, whether it's, their mental clutter or their physical space?
Sure. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think more corporate, but a lot of the stuff has more to do with home. Well, I'm going to share this because this was an in-home business. So I had a client and she had a very critical mother-in-law. Just nothing was ever good enough. She'd come in and complain about how the space was just cluttered. And she was also a very creative woman, right? So she had tons, like wanted to make soap, wanted to make greeting cards, like just was super creative. And so what we did is it was a whole home declutter, but we ended up decluttering her office, her bonus room. And what I said, I want you to pick 3 things that you want to focus on right now. If you want to do soap making in the future, trust that you'll get what you need when you need it, and you can attempt that then, but you can't do everything. We only have so much time in a day. And so that helped her focus on her business. And she's like, okay, the greeting cards, I want to make some money on this. It's a good way to express my creativity, but it also improved her relationship with her mother-in-law. But not only would she not criticize her, but she was able to say, you know what, I'm really overwhelmed. Will you come watch the kids? And I need you to support me instead of always being critical. So it helped her professionally and personally.
And that's a perfect way to end this, because the women in corporate, especially if you're still have little kids at home and you're trying to do it all. And I think during the pandemic, it was determined that women picked up 50% of the responsibilities for both the house and the kids. And, men just kept doing their normal routine. But I think when you start asking for help, that's also another way to declutter your mental stress and your anxiety, because we can't do it all. And, more and more, the whole term that's called work-life balance is just a myth. There
Yes.
is you can't balance it, because there is no way to balance it. You either focus on one thing or another thing, where you try to ask for help both at work and at home. So I think that's a perfect story to leave that. All right, Julie, any final words before we close?
Thank you for having me. And I just want everyone to know, remember, you're good enough, You're worthy and you're loved, and you're stronger than you give yourself credit for it, climbing and busting those glass ceilings at work.
Sounds good, Julie. Thank you so much.
Well, I got a couple of really good takeaways from Julie. First of all, the physical clutter could be costing you a promotion. If someone is coming into your office at work and they see that your desk is completely messy, that might prevent them from keeping you in mind from a promotion. And then the second thing that I thought was interesting, the spiritual clutter, the fact that you may not keep gratitude in mind, or that you may not be forgiving someone that wronged you or whatever. And if you keep that anger, that's going to cost you your own peace of mind. And it could also impact your health. So Julie leaves us with two great tips. Tip number one, she says, write down the real impact of the clutter in your life. What is a clutter costing you? Is it costing you a promotion? Is it costing you peace of mind? Tip number two, she says, dig deeper behind the why. Why are you keeping a messy desk? Why is it that you're keeping that clutter around? Is clutter maybe impacting your relationship? And how is it impacting your relationship? So for example, if someone is gaslighting you constantly and you don't say anything or say, hey, that behavior is not acceptable, that's emotional clutter. And another thing is, why do I think and act this way? So it's going to be a little bit of reflection, but there's always a why. So all of Julie's contact information is going to be on the episode website. So go to Apple Podcasts, click on the episode website, and it'll take you to all of her contact information. Last but not least, I want you to go to my website and take the free quiz. The quiz is actually going to be linked on the episode website as well, but the free quiz will also give you an inkling on how you may be sabotaging your career development. So there's 3 ways that you could be sabotaging it, and the quiz is a free quiz. It's less than 3 minutes. And it'll give you a little bit of insight on how you may be sabotaging, and it'll give you some good free resources as well. So with that, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Let these stories of self-encouragement and professional development serve as a guide in navigating through corporate America in the most practical and fulfilling way possible. Do not forget to subscribe to the show at nowomanleftbehind.com for more content like this. Leave a rating and share it with your friends, because we want to make sure that no woman is left behind. Until I see you next time, remember to be brave, be bold, and take action.